Welcome back to another episode of Marketing Girly by Sky Society. Today I am super excited to be talking with Tara Fraser. She is a creative and marketing operations professional, previously working at some super exciting brands like Rent the Runway, Square, Etsy, and Spotify. Welcome, Tara.
Thank you, Natalie. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course, I'm excited to kind of break down what it means to work in creative product marketing ops because I think there's a lot there to unpack and we're going to jump into all of that. But before we do, can you tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. As you mentioned, my name's Tara. I am a New Yorker. I was raised in upstate New York. I'm currently in Brooklyn, New York. I've lived here since I was 18, so like 17 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm like the real New Yorker because once you get past 10 years, you've actually been
You
able
say
to.
you're actually from there?
I'm actually from there. I've never actually left the state of New York. Um, and I have been in creative operations since the beginning of my career. I've worked across multiple different industries. I started in digital publishing, I moved to creative agencies, and then I have most recently been in house for the past 7 years. And I've held a bunch of different roles like producer, project manager, program manager, and that's kind of what is all encompassing of the term creative operations. So I most recently held a role at Rent the Runway as the director of creative and marketing operations, and I am very thrilled to like love what I do, and excited to like continue to grow in my career.
Yes. Okay. So we were kind of chatting before off camera of like what this role entails. So can you maybe like talk to us about your role at Rent the Runway and what it actually means to kind of be like to hold that title of director of product and marketing operations? Like what did your role encompass?
Um, what didn't it encompass? So in roles like this, I think it's really important to kind of outline exactly like what that means because a lot of times when you hear like creative or marketing operations, it seems very narrow. Um, in this role specifically, I was brought in to essentially be the conduit between marketing, creative, and product. I'm essentially like the connector. I'm meant to oversee and like help make sure that things are operating as efficiently and effectively as possible. So, what that could mean in a lot of different ways is I'm partnering with marketing stakeholders or channel owners and working to essentially build out a process or a way of working. I'm helping streamline the brief process, how we write briefs, how to make them better, how we then intake them, and then build out timelines, help prioritize, and then also make sure that once it gets to creative, it's able to be actioned on. And then I work really closely with creative to make sure they have timelines. They understand the ask, they're staying on brief. And if production's involved as well, making sure that that layer is considered and included, and all the other little details that come with that. Usually, when production's involved, legal's involved. There's contracts to be signed. If you're doing something like a good example is growth marketing. Paid social is huge, right? So, a lot of that is how do we scale our paid channels, especially on social, and think about the unique platforms that are all encompassing of paid social and how do we make content to keep that always on because it's a lever that once you turn on it has to stay on in order for it to be impactful because it's a part of a larger funnel for marketing. So I kind of help think about that and help build that out, but across a multitude of channels. So whether it's paid social, it can also be life cycle marketing, if we're doing big brand moments, how we think about bringing to life larger integrated marketing. So the way it's kind of always been built is there's always on, and then there's like those big marketing initiatives. And so I'm kind of always overseeing that, helping plan that out, and making sure it runs as smoothly as possible. The simpler way of saying all of that is I have to know what everybody's job is and I have to know how it's done to help them. So I always joke that I'm like my teams always joke that I'm just kind of like the tiny mom that like knows what everyone needs to be doing at all times. And you help keep it on time, on budget, and on brief.
Okay. Wow. So I can see like the operations part of it is really true. Like you are overseeing so many different things, making sure that they run smoothly, which sounds like a lot of organization. You're touching a lot of different things and you're touching a lot of different people, which I can imagine be a challenging role, exciting, but nonetheless challenging. What would you say is the hardest part of working in this operations type role?
The hardest part of operations is that something is always going to need attention. Like nothing will ever go perfect, and you have to just kind of accept that. I think it's really important to think about operations as something that's ever evolving. There's a world where you want to establish a process and you need to test it and make sure it works. But just because you've set up a process, it doesn't mean it's finite. It has to evolve, it has to be flexible because the reality is operations is a function that for the most part is like building out a framework and also then making sure it can be adaptable enough to continuously support the teams that you're working with because there's no perfect formula because if there were, it you wouldn't need operations. We would come in, we'd set it up, we'd leave it, and it would be okay. But the fact of the matter is, operations is like the consistent ability to adapt to what you're doing and to like make sure that you're being supportive of ongoing needs. Businesses always change. Change is truly the only constant in any place that you work. Everything's always changing. Business needs fluctuate, things of that nature. So being adaptable and being flexible for me has like truly made operations successful and also it helps you learn. I think it's really important to look at everything as if you you may know and have a lot of information and knowledge and experience, but I like to look at things as I could always be wrong. And if I think I know it all, then I'm like, where do I go from that? So being willing to learn, being willing to adapt, being willing to like be uncomfortable.
Yeah. I also think that perspective of I don't know everything and I will never know everything is such a great one to have no matter what role you are because if you ever get to a point where you think you know everything, then
Where are
probably
you
not a good
going?
sign.
Yeah, like aren't you bored?
And I think not only just like accepting that, but like embracing that of like I'm never gonna be able to like see all the angles or like know every single possible way that this can go wrong, but I can feel confident in my ability to adapt or to solve any problem that comes my way.
Exactly. Be willing to learn at any phase of your career.
Yes, I love that. Okay, so this is a very unique role, I would say, within the marketing umbrella, which I always love talking about on the podcast because it's always great to kind of open up your eyes to different career paths that are available to you. But is this a path that you knew you always wanted to take, or kind of how did you fall into this career path?
I did not know what I wanted to do. I think it's one of those things like I'm your typical like graduated from college in when did I graduate? How old am I? 2011, I want to say I graduated. So I graduated in what was considered like the first recession, right? So like, and everything was turning digital. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I loved marketing. I went to school for um, communications with a specialization of advertising. So I kind of knew. I also just didn't really know how to break into the industry. So one of the things I did after college was I was a full-time nanny. I had been in New York in the city and it was something that was easy to kind of jump into. And I realized that like those skills actually transferred to something like an executive assistant or an office manager and in other instances, project management. So I was fortunate enough to like use the connections that I had, and I was able to like land a role in digital publishing at at a website that is still around. It's called Cool Hunting. And I was able to kind of work as an executive assistant and an office manager, but then I got exposed to production pretty quickly. And I went on set one day and I was just like, oh, I want to do this. Like, this is what I want to do. Like, the energy of the set was infectious. Like, I loved it. I loved seeing, like, somebody in charge telling everybody what to do. And I was like, I kind of do that already for, like, a person. So maybe I could do this as my career. And so I was really interested in that and just kind of leaned into it. And I was so thankful. I had such a supportive team around me. And so I entered my career into production, like as a producer, which was a bit of project management and a bit of production at times. So it was a little bit of hybrid. And I worked in an environment that also really like supported my creativity. They wanted my ideas. They wanted to talk through potential strategies because we would pitch a lot. So that's kind of where I started. And then I continuously built through that as like a producer in-house at some creative agencies. And what I will always say is like producers and project managers, I think producing always helped me a little bit more because I knew a lot more about the production side of everything, which can be intense and like incredibly detail oriented. Whereas like project management, sometimes it is, people think of that as like, oh, just timelines and oh, you're just organizing and keeping track of things. So I really think that producers and project managers like need each other. And also when, if you can do both, it really kind of helps create a background and experience that becomes a little more transferable. So I kind of moved through that to a degree when I first went in-house at Spotify in 2018 on the brand and creative team. I was hired as a producer, but you had to do a lot of producer project management stuff. And I was at a point where I was getting more senior and I kind of had to evaluate if I wanted to go down a road of like being an executive producer or like a director of production, or if I maybe wanted to do something that was like more all-encompassing of operations and having the ability to maybe do a little bit of both, because production can be intense. You can have to travel a lot. You're, you know, working really long hours. You're on set for a lot. And I didn't really know if that's what I wanted to do based on my future. So I really kind of started to lean more into this like creative ops, program management situation, which has worked out really well so far. But like what the future holds, I don't know, because at this point, like in my most recent role at the Runway, I also oversaw production. So I, you know, that was underneath me, and my like scope of my role essentially. So I'm still very involved in all of it, and I actually really like it because I love both so much.
Yeah. And then I would also like, you never know too where your previous skill set will like make you a great fit for any future role. And kind of like how you're saying, like you're overseeing production now, even though maybe that's not directly in your title. So I'm excited to see where your skills take you to. I want to go back to this producer role at Spotify for a minute because that sounds so exciting. So can you give us maybe some insight into any of the fun campaigns that you got to work on while you were there?
Yeah. The role at Spotify is really funny because I, at the time, had told my boyfriend in the beginning of the year, like ex-boyfriend, but I had told him, I was like, I want to work at Spotify this year. And I had somehow, somewhere, the creative resourcing lead had found me on LinkedIn. She had reached out that fall, like fall of 2017, and I went in and talked to them. And then she reached out again and brought me in like the spring of 2018. And I had another interview, and it was for a contract role. So at the time, it was like 3 months. The rate was good, but I was also contracting at Time Inc. as it was being acquired by Meredith as like a freelancer. I was like an associate director of content strategy, um, which essentially was like me coming up with creative ideas, pitching them to brands, and then kind of rolling out and executing like whatever I sold in, which was super fun. And I loved doing that. Um, but they were putting together a full-time offer for me. And so I had the choice between going contract at Spotify for 3 months or leaving a full-time job offer on the table. And so I actually chose Spotify because I was like, I'm going to regret this if I don't do it. I have to. I was so
Oh my
uncomfortable.
gosh.
I'd never done contract work before. Um, and so I took the leap and I went to Spotify and I was on the brand and creative team. I was actually there for like a year and a half as a contractor. Um, and I always joke that I got like my MBA at Spotify because you just kind of had to like, as a contractor, you kind of have to like sink or swim. You kind of have to understand like how to dive in head first. And I think it's important to think about that no matter where you are. The quicker you can like kind of dig your heels in and almost be like not afraid to like get things wrong, it shows a lot of like ambition. It also helps you figure things out faster. I encourage people to like just kind of ask the questions, like move, like act and like fix it later if you need to, because the truth of the matter is like people have grace for that too. It's
Yeah.
okay to make mistakes. So I joined Spotify and I was actually put the first project I ever worked on at Spotify. I worked on what was called the mid-year campaign, and it was a global performance marketing campaign. Um, and I think we had like 6 or 8 weeks before launch, and we had to own all the creative. The creative that was sold in was like this really cool like CGI campaign. When I tell you I had truly never done anything like that before, I mean it. And I just was like, okay, I guess I'll figure this out. Um, and within my first week there, we had like found a creative partner out like in London. So we had to like go to London. We hired dancers, we hired a choreographer, we shot in the studio where they shoot like Harry Potter for like the motion tracking because
Oh my gosh.
essentially it was so cool. It was like so cool and so fun. And like I was hooked. I was hooked. I was like, I will stay here forever. And I did a good enough job because they kept assigning me to other projects. So, I did things like that. I did things where for Pride Month, Spotify and Netflix had done a partnership. So I worked with the Fab Five, the original Fab Five on Netflix, not the new
Oh
Fab
wow.
Five. But I worked with them on a shoot. So we did photo and video, and like we rolled out this big campaign. There was always like a design system involved. So like every campaign rollout kind of had like a design toolkit attached to it. So we did a lot of that. I worked on Pantheon, which was Pantheon Part 2, where I got to work with Jaden Smith and Cardi B, Gunna, and Juice World. We made like 9 foot tall custom metallic statues that went in the Brooklyn Museum and were on an exhibit for like a whole week. There was fan art. It was so cool. Jaden Smith wrote me a thank you note. Like
What?
it was it was the coolest thing ever. And like even a few years after I left Spotify, even the statue was showing up in like a lot of this content him and his family were doing. And sometimes I would just get calls because they'd be like, "We broke it. Can you connect us to the
No.
fabricator?" And I was like, "Yeah, guys, I'll connect you." And like, but I didn't know how to build statues, and like I figured it out. It was great. I mean, I didn't build them, but I figured out who to work with to build
Yeah.
them. And it was such a fun experience. And I just also like the people I worked with at Spotify were incredible. They were some of the most talented and like kind, thoughtful people I've ever worked with. And I just had like the best time. I'm still friends with some of them. Some of them have left and started their own design firms. And I'm always so impressed by like the people that I've been able to work with because they made me better at my job.
Yeah, and that literally sounds like a dream job. Like that sounds just like you're having the most fun. I like you're talking about these super super cool campaigns that you got to do and you got to help bring to life. And you had to mention like you had no idea what you were doing. You had to figure out how to make a statue. Like I don't think anybody's ever had to figure that out before. What is your process for like how do you approach if you're given a task like we need this whatever, like the statue one, for
Yeah.
example, and you're like, I literally don't even know, and like maybe even at first you're like, I don't even know where to start of like figuring out how to get that made. What are the steps that you take to get yourself from like, I've never done this before to actually executing something new?
Yeah. I mean, whenever I'm asked to do something crazy, the first thing I, like any normal person, I'm just like, what? Like, what do you want me to do? And then I'm like, okay, cool. Like, let's figure it out. I think my whole process, and I kind of touched on this previously, is like, you don't have to have all the answers. Like, that's for me the fun stuff. Like, throw me something that I've never done before, throw me a challenge, make me feel like I'm a little in over my head. And like, it makes you figure things out. Like, thankfully, we had a ton of really great relationships at Spotify. We kind of were going through like how we wanted to bring all of this to life. A fabricator was recommended to us, and you know, we had like a list of them, and the one that we picked was called Pretty in Plastic. I pray I'm not saying that wrong. But it's run by this woman named Julie in LA, and she does like mostly at the time she was doing like toy and like large scale like um fabrication for things like Comic-Con. I think most recently they did something for Tyler the Creator on his tour. And what was really interesting with them is like fabrication of statues, and the reason why Pantheon is so cool is because one, it was pitched in by a creative director on the branding creative team. Her name is Cecilia. She's incredible. One of the most brilliant creative minds I've ever worked with. She had actually pitched in Pantheon like the year before. It was not a campaign that was like slated. She pitched it into the head of music. I think like music and partnerships. I might be saying that wrong. But she pitched it in, and then it was like the second iteration of it. And we knew that they wanted to fabricate the statues a little bit differently because historically fabrication of statues is like a very intense process. It's like, there's a very old school way about fabricating, but why she sold in this idea is because representation of statues of brown and black individuals is not common because the fabrication doesn't always allow for the representation of features properly, right? So one of the biggest challenges was like hair or like detail of like outfits or accessories. In one case, Jaden wanted to have his grill. So like little things like that. A normal fabricator wouldn't have worked with us on that. They would have been like, no, their hair has to be straight. And I'm not going to a famous artist and telling them how to look. Like that defeats the whole purpose.
Yeah.
So we actually ended up finding someone who did things in who was able to 3D print for us. And then like seam everything together. And it's also just about finding partners who are willing to also look at like the creative and be like, yeah, we can find ways to make that happen. So it's really just like building out, finding the right partner, having like the conversation, consistently problem solving, consistently having conversations and working with it. And like also I was working with a fabricator who was like flexible and willing to make sure that like the creative vision that we had was able to be brought to life, as well as ensuring like ensuring that like the creative team was heard and we were kind of just consistently problem solving to get the result that we wanted to. So I think really the process is pretty long-winded, but it's also just like having the right partners, being collaborative, making sure you're having honest conversations, and eventually you'll get there. It may not be perfect, but you'll get there.
Yeah, it sounds, I can see like the challenge being exciting of like, we want to get this specific thing come to life, and like not everybody that I may be introduced to even can bring this to life, but like it's your job, your responsibility to find the right partners And I can imagine really rewarding when you do get to finally see it, and like that's your effort and your work that you put into it. So super cool to hear about all of that. I'm also curious. I'm sure you are. I'm sure your answer to this is yes, but I know sometimes accepting contract roles can be really scary. And like how you said with yours is like you had a full-time offer and then you had like a 3-month contract role. Like, what do you choose here? So, do you have any advice for somebody that's considering a contract role?
I genuinely, like, when it comes to contract roles and whether or not to like accept a contract role or like versus a full-time role, whatever it may be, I think for me, my advice is if it's a job that you would really like, even though it's like a contract role, I would still take it. One thing that I've learned, especially being in house and like working at these big companies, is full-time headcount is hard to come by. Contractor budgets are a real thing. I've literally planned them out for in annual planning. And the thing is like it also, what I really have liked about it is that I get to decide whether or not I like the company before I say yes to a full-time job. Because sometimes leaving a company, maybe you really love the people you work with, you don't know what you're walking into. It kind of gives you that buffer to be able to decide or to be able to go in and like, if you're like, I want to try this out for a little while and then I want to leave, it's great. Most contracts are W-2, so they're still taking out your taxes or you're not a 1099, which is usually what you do as a freelancer, where you have to take out your own taxes. You should probably pay them quarterly. I'm giving all the advice because I've made all the mistakes. But with contractors, it's usually W-2. You can, after a certain amount of time, you can get benefits. And I've had really great experiences as a contractor. I was at Spotify for a year and a half. I was at Etsy for about a year. I even now would definitely be willing to like take a contract role above like keeping a full-time job, because I do think it's a good way to kind of see if you like something. And also, too, it might be your way into a company, because I know a lot of people who have converted. I think, like had I decided to stay at Etsy, I probably could have converted at some point. I just left because I did get a full-time offer at Square, and I was kind of moving into a direction where I wanted to be a manager and I wanted to have that opportunity, and it did present itself. So that is like a big reason why I moved on. But I loved my team at Etsy. Still have like a going away deck that they made for me that I like read every once in a while when I'm like, am I good at what I do? Like when you like need a little reassurance, I sometimes just read it because it was so sweet and there were so
Oh,
many people who said something nice to me, and I'm like, I just needed a little reminder.
yeah, yeah, that's so sweet. Yeah, I can see how it gives you that opportunity to like try something new. I'm sure have a little bit more flexibility. And I have heard of a lot of people like that role ends up getting extended. It's also like a low risk way for them to try you out too, right? And then you can prove
Yep.
yourself and show that, they should keep you on for longer or they should bring you on full time. So that kind of trial goes both ways.
Yeah. I also like, if you think you're going to look back and kick yourself for not doing something or trying something, like I always am just saying like don't live your life in a way where you're going to look back and wish you had done something. Like it's better to say, "Oh, I tried it and it didn't work," than like, "Oh, I wish I had done that and don't know about it." But I'm also like, that's my philosophy. It doesn't need to be everybody else's. I say this about most things in my life. So, like that's just kind of how I look at it too. Like your career is like a storybook. You have a bunch of different chapters in it. So you might as well like have some fun ones.
I love that. And also have this saying, it's like you are more likely to regret the things that you didn't do versus the things that you did do. I feel like that's become a common saying now. Okay, so really quickly, you kind of touched on moving over to Square because you wanted to take on some more management experience. And one of the things you had shared with me is that you're really passionate about learning how to be a good manager and how that can change your team's growth. So, can you share a little bit about what you think it takes to be a good manager?
Yes. I love this question. I like to give context for everything, so I'm sorry that I like am rambling on, but I had a really incredible manager at Etsy. Her name was Erica Bryant. She's now at Nike. And she truly inspired me to like want to be a manager. She was so kind, but like was always kind of just making sure we were on track. She was super supportive, very eyes on, hands off, kind of trusted the team that she led. And she was my driving force to like want to be a manager. And I got the opportunity at Square. And what I will tell you is managing people is hard. And there's a lot of things you have to learn about yourself too when you become a manager. I think one of the things that I had to kind of confront was like my fear of not being liked.
Mm.
I really like wanted my team to like me. I wanted to like make sure that they knew I had their back. And like in a lot of ways, sometimes that got in the way of me delivering like feedback or leading in ways that could have helped my team more. And I think that that's something that's really important to assess is you can you have to be willing to sometimes do the hard thing, and it's uncomfortable, and but you can do it in a way that's like speak firmly but kindly, like you're doing it because feedback is a gift. You're doing it because it's supposed to push people to their higher potential. And I had to learn that a lot when I was a manager at Square. And I will say, like, I loved my team. By the time I left, I started with two direct reports. I had four when I left. And I still keep in touch with all of them. And I actually was invited to one of their weddings.
Oh.
Yeah, and I like truly care about them so much. I think that, I had to be honest with them about areas I needed to grow. They had to be honest with me. Sometimes I like would be too loud of a voice in the room. So I had to learn how to like sit back and let other people speak and maybe guide them outside of the room. I also had to learn how to lead in ways that required more visibility, required more transparency, and really kind of be able to help coach. And I left Square in a way where I knew that the team that I had reporting to me would have been fine on their own. And that was a really rewarding feeling. And even now, like a few of my direct reports are still there. One of them has now moved into a very similar role that I held when I was there. Her scope's much bigger, so she's like doing a lot more. But she's now like calling me, being like, being a manager is so hard. She's like, and she was one of my tough ones. She was my biggest learning lesson too. But it made us so much closer. It built our relationship. It made me better. It made her better. But now she'll be like, I need advice. And I'm like, okay, girl, like let's talk. But
Like
yeah,
I was right in your shoes a couple years ago.
sometimes it's so hard. And I'm like, yeah, I know. So, yeah. And most recently I had a team too. And like, even, even now, like I walked into that being like, sometimes I'm not going to be liked. Sometimes I'm going to have to deliver the hard feedback. Sometimes I'm going to have to make decisions that I wish I didn't have to, but you have to be willing to do the hard thing.
Yeah. I also think your kind of what you said about how that desire to be liked, I think that's really universal, especially among women, of wanting to be liked and having the decisions and things that you need to make to advance your career to be a manager, sometimes contradicting being liked all the time and like being nice to everybody and having everybody only say great things about you. And I think that's a constant battle. I think especially as women that you face as you grow in your career of like that. I've talked about it on the podcast before, but one of my favorite books is called The Likability Trap, and it just kind of like goes into this in a lot more depth of just the dynamics that go into the desire of wanting to be liked and how we may not be fully realizing the ways in which it's holding us back
Yeah.
and the decisions we're not making because we want to be liked.
Yeah, perception is hard, right? Like I think sometimes I actually was talking to a friend this morning, like we were on a walk, and he was sharing some information with me, and I was like, sometimes no matter what you do, you're gonna be a villain in someone's story. Like
Yeah.
and that's just it. Like you can't change that. You can't change how they view or feel about you. And getting comfortable with that is incredibly uncomfortable, but it's actually a really powerful tool in all areas of your life.
Yeah. And I think once you let go of wanting to control other
Yes.
people's perceptions, then that also like frees up your mental capacity and gives you less stress of kind of once you let go of that. Cause I think we're really, really, especially when you're younger, I think you really, really hold on to that and carry a lot of weight into what other people's perception of you is.
Yeah. I mean, as women, you're basically told your whole life, like, be the good girl, like, be
Yeah.
likable, like, don't be too loud, don't be too this, don't be too that. And, like, my biggest advice is just, like, be whatever you are. Like, don't try and change who you are. Like, I understand. I'm I've gotten to a place where I'm like so self-aware that I'm like I can tell you every bad thing about me. And like it's a little bit of a trap, but and maybe I can't. Like maybe that's also me not being self-aware, right? But I do think it's important to like know your strengths and your weaknesses and kind of own it.
Yeah. And then I think also too, specifically with the weaknesses, I think it's easier to like kind of not look at them, right? Like close your eyes, like I don't want to look at those things. You're like, I don't want to, but then once you're like actually like, you mentioned like, oh, sometimes I can be really loud in a room. But like once you recognize that of like, oh, this is something like I need to be more mindful and like maybe let other people speak before I share or whatever it is,
Mhm.
then that gives you the ability to like feel more confident and more strength in that versus I think sometimes we're like I'm not great at this thing but like I don't want to look at it or at least I know I'm really guilty of that. Sometimes like the things that I'm not really great at I like almost don't want to deal with or look at versus like actually facing them and fixing them.
Yeah. They call that there's like a saying called like swallowing the frog is like you do the hardest thing first and you just kind of have to like sometimes look in the mirror and like confront yourself with it and it's not easy, but
Yeah.
it can be powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, kind of, we touched on, I think, a lot there of your previous roles. Those are people that are trying to keep up. Contract role at Spotify, doing production. You moved over to Etsy as well in a contract role, doing project and production manager. And then over to Square, and then over to Rent the Runway, where you are now. I know we're like going through a lot, but
Yeah.
one of the things they really wanted to touch on in our episode today is that you recently have kind of gone through the job search process, which for anybody is super grueling and a lot of work. So I was wondering if you can kind of share some of the things that you've learned through the job search process and any advice you have in that area.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is I always have people read my resume. I have a template. I don't use AI to write my like I don't use AI to write my resume, but sometimes I will like essentially have it read and scan it for like keywords if I need to like craft it or like write it for a specific role because it's hard to encompass everything you're doing, but I do think like think about the things that are like the most important to what your skill set is. So I always try to think about no more than like 2 to 3 things that I can really lean into. So as I've gone through my career, kind of like speaking in each section about what are the 2 to 3 big things that I did, what did I have a performance metric that I hit? Did I manage a budget that was expansive? What was I most proud of? Things of that nature. I also have a portfolio, I have a website because I think it's really important to show my work. I might not be a creative, but I even though I'm ops, like I have a book because I touched it too and it's oh, did I freeze? Hold on. I'm gonna chat. Did I freeze again? I might not be creative, but I do have a portfolio because my work also touched the process. And I think it's really important to have the ability to kind of like share that and showcase that because I am a part of the creative process. I am a part of bringing things to life. And so it's also, a representation of what I'm able to do as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, portfolios, I always recommend, no matter, even if your role doesn't touch creative at all, of just having a visual representation of what you've done and what you've worked on is so helpful, especially because everybody has a resume. And a resume, like you said, like cannot at all encompass everything you've done at all of these roles. It would literally be impossible. And so having a portfolio is just such a great way to show like these are some things that I've worked on. This is something you can like scroll through quickly and get an impression of me and who I am and all of my work. So I absolutely love that you've built that. Where'd you build yours?
I use Squarespace.
Okay. Would you recommend? You think it's easy?
I think it's pretty easy. I'm pretty comfortable with it. I built it myself. It's not perfect, but like it's a pretty basic template. And I do feel like I get to kind of like show my personality a little bit. And I also have my resume on my website. And then I also have like a get in touch if you like want to work together.
Mhm.
But yeah, just kind of like I have like a bio and then a bunch of projects you can look at.
I
Um,
also love that you bought your domain, tarabfraser.com. I also think that's so great to do. I always recommend when I talk to girls, and I in our accelerator, we help a lot of people build, help a lot of our students build their portfolios. And so I always recommend, like, if you can buy your domain name, because in the future, when people Google you, when you're far up in your career and you're successful and people are talking about you, you can control what shows up at the top of Google. Like you get to have more ownership of what people see when they Google you. And it's only like, what, $12 a year to own your domain?
Yeah, it's not super expensive. I also like you can put in your Instagram bio, you can put it in your TikTok link tree, like whatever you want to do, like you can do that and you can show it. You can also build like case studies. If I were to touch this, this is how I would do it. I think it's really important to like think about how you can showcase what you're trying to put forward. Um, and my other advice, my last piece of advice is like use your network. Use your network. Please don't be afraid to ask people for favors. I think it's really great that like I have people who reach out to me. If I can't help them, I'll tell them or I'll like try and connect them with someone, but I do think you should use your network. I am so proud of the network that I have. I have made a ton of relationships throughout my career, and I also think it's just really important like always hold on to the relationships you've built, share your information, keep in touch with people, and like maybe a project didn't go perfectly, but people will never like people remember how you make them feel. And so it also kind of just goes back to like be kind, build your network, care about the people you're around. I think it's really important. And sometimes those are the people who are saying your name in a room and that room is going to help you like move forward in your career, which is like super important, which is also like during this conversation why I'm literally name dropping people because I'm like these are people who had an impact on me. These are people I care about and think are really smart and people should know. And yeah, I mean also like I cold email people. I will literally if I connect with someone, I'll send them a note, I'll send them my resume. If there isn't a job somewhere, I'm like low key obsessed with Locker.
Oh
Um,
my gosh, yes, I've heard great things.
I'm obsessed. I think it's so smart. I think it's like brilliant. I genuinely think they're going to take off. And I reached out yesterday and I was like, you don't need an ops role, but like, here's my information if you ever need any help. Like, I'm happy to do it. I also think that just because I most recently was at a director level. Like, before that, I was a senior manager. And I'm not above going back to being a senior manager. I'm also not above going back to a role where like, I'm more in the weeds. I'm running the projects. I'm less at the top. Um, because the fact of the matter is like at the end of the day, I just want to work with kind, smart people and make great work. And that's kind of what I'm looking for at the moment. And I hope I can, I mean, I have a bunch of people I'm talking to, but like, I know that what is supposed to happen will happen for me next. And I'm just gonna practice patience. It was not my strong suit, but like I think it's really important to just understand like make sure you're applying for jobs that like make sense for you. Like reach out to people, use your network, build a portfolio, clean up your resume, try a different format, like show your personality a little bit. Like it's okay to have fun. Like you're working how many hours a day for how many years? Like have a little fun with it.
Yeah. And also too, like that, how you mentioned, like you reached out to Locker, you're doing all this networking. They may not be the companies that hire you right now, but you have no idea if those could potentially be the right time, right fit 2, 3, like 5 years in the future. And
Yeah.
so I think your perspective is really great of just like always being kind. I mean, just like general things, but I think we forget how important they are and just that you never know when those things are going to come back and come full circle. And
Yeah.
one random cold email you did today may turn into a role 4 years from now. Like you literally have no idea.
Yeah, and also just like even if you can't help someone or they reach out to you, like just respond. It's just like
Yeah.
kind to respond to people. I know as I've like left other jobs, people are like, "Hey, do you know so and so here?" And I'm like, "Listen, I don't, but like I wish you the best of luck. If you see anything else, I'm happy to help." Like you just have to be honest, and that goes a long way too. Like just being responsive, being considerate. Someone took time to reach out to you. It's polite to at least respond.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then also, I wanted to ask, kind of going back to resumes, just because I know so much resume advice is super conflicting. I feel like I've heard a lot of different things of like, do this, do that. I feel like on TikTok, everybody's got like a hot take on
Mhm.
their resume. I'm curious, is your resume one page?
It is. It's one page. I almost am like, should it be one page? But no, it is one page. I only ever have, I think there's like two or three roles on there at a time that's like has the explanation and then at the bottom it says like where else I've worked. I also have like a section for my skills and then I have been very fortunate to win some really incredible awards with some of the work that I've done, so I do list my awards.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I still always say one page. I think like the rule is like one page until you surpass like a lot of years of experience. Also, people I think look at your LinkedIn too, oftentimes to kind of fill in the blanks for all the other stuff.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Um, okay, Tara. Well, we've gone through so much. We've talked about so many different topics. Do you have any last advice you'd like to share with marketing girlies?
Oh my goodness. I think the last piece of advice is like at one point in my career, I was not anywhere. I was freelancing, I was contracting, and it was before I started at Spotify. And I literally like was watching other people around me kind of hit their stride, get promotions, and I felt like, what have I done? Like I feel like maybe I'm scrambling, maybe I like took a wrong turn, and then I ended up at Spotify and I took all the things that I learned and all the experiences I had and I was able to apply them to Spotify. And I think for me it was that light bulb moment of like just because things don't feel like they're where you want them to be or where you hope for them to be doesn't mean that they won't get there. And I think it's really important to like just be patient and remember that like the experiences and the knowledge that you learn along the way and the people that you meet are part of the process, and it's really important to just kind of trust that like what is meant for you will find you and you will land exactly where you're supposed to be. And sometimes it just takes a little longer, and that's okay.
That is beautiful. A perfect way to end this episode. Tara, thank you so much for coming on Marketing Girly. I've had so much fun talking with you today.
Thanks for having me, Natalie. It's been great.